putting together the, sending you guys a email right now.
Okay, that sounds
Try to-
good.
Send it, 'cause sometimes it- Do you guys have any today?
We do have one, yeah. If you're having trouble getting it, we could start with us if you.
I want to get these, let me get these over to you, because like I said, there's 4, there's 7, 9, 19, and 20. I think some of them, I think we're ready to sign,
Okay, yeah.
so. I mean, we should probably just talk about them one last time, just in case, but.
Okay.
If you guys want to go ahead.
Yeah, we'll stop a couple minutes, so we're gonna go. We'll stop a couple minutes, so we can get going.
Okay. Welcome.
It's starting in just a couple minutes, people on Zoom.
Did you send it over?
I didn't, yeah, no. I've got it set up, ready to go.
We got copies through if you want to see them.
I just got your email.
It took that long.
Yeah. You guys ready? Yeah, okay, we're good whenever you are.
Okay, so we've got a couple, that I think we're ready to, I think we're ready to TA. 9 and 19 and 20.
Okay,
So, I mean, I have copies of those. If you'd rather do it by DocuSign, I don't know if you guys want to spend time kind of go over them all, because you had sent them to us. We don't have any changes or corrections or suggestions, so. I mean, do you want to go through them, or do you feel comfortable just saying if they're good, we can just
yeah, I think
sign them?
if they're good, I think
Okay.
we're good, yeah.
Do you want me, I can send them to you either by DocuSign, or we can physically sign them. I don't care. We can do it either way.
Let's just do DocuSign, so we
Okay.
have the.
Okay, so that's 9, 19, and 20. So that's good. That's 3 that are
That's-
good to go. And then we have one more that's a counter, and then one more that we'd like to discuss. So we've got 4 and 7.
Okay, which one
Um,
did you want to start with?
Let's start with 4.
4?
And I think, by the way, I think we're getting close on these. So I'm getting kind of, quite frankly, kind of excited about the fact that we are, I think we're zeroing in on where we need to be.
Yeah,
You said, you got. Did you say Shane has logged in?
yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Thanks. So. And I know that we've gone back and forth with clean and unclean, so this is trying to use the most recent clean one that you sent, Hannah, so fine, I mean, if there's stuff that's different, please point it out. So, we're fine with the one, and somehow the line numbers got removed, so I'm not sure if that was me or not, so sorry about that, but, 4-1, we're okay with that. So here's what we did on between 8 and 4.1D subsection 1. So you guys had suggested that you wanted to sort of reassert this as a positive explanation of the previous section. And so what we're saying is, why not add it to the list of the must includes? And then we reworded it as an explicit statement that the letter of offer cannot guarantee an appointment beyond the specific and initial appointment period in accordance with Article 4 of the CBA. Because I know we kind of went back and forth about a reference to Article 4, how much of provision 4 needed to be in there and so on and so forth. But because we already have this list of other things that at a minimum have to be included, we thought that we could just list it there. I don't think it fundamentally changes the meaning, other than obviously the rewording doesn't contemplate the concept of a formal break-in appointment period, but it does specifically assert it in an explicit way. So I think it accomplishes the same thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you guys have any questions or thoughts on that.
I don't.
I don't think so. I think that's a fine place to put it.
Okay. All right, so moving on, we had a lot of conversation about Hannah, what you had presented in 6. I think we get it now. I do think that from a practical perspective, we don't have to put this in the contract, but I do think, once we kind of TA this, I do think it would be helpful and instructive if we could go through some. I would like to revisit those examples.
Okay.
So that when we go out and do a training and attempt to implement the language, there is just a robust understanding on both sides, and that when we train our HRLs and folks, we can give some very salient, meaningful examples, because I think that would be really helpful.
Happy to do that.
Okay, so when we went down to number 12, it was a separate, you had mentioned that it was a separate provision. So here, I think that we just want to, again, establish some understanding. We just want to be sure that these criteria are permitted as a minimum and not as a guarantee. And it doesn't say either way. And so I just want to make sure that we have an understanding that, because one of the issues that's been raised, not in the bargaining session, but adjacent to this, has been, look, we read this letter of appointment as if a person checks these boxes, then they're guaranteed a reappointment. And we don't want that. Like, we recognize that it's our responsibility to make sure letters aren't written that way, but we also don't want to now interpret this language to say that we need to put that in the letters. Does that make sense? Because we want to make sure that we don't put that in the letters. We don't want to confuse people and say, if you do these things, you're guaranteed reappointment.
Right.
Correct. Yeah.
Does my question make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
Okay.
we don't want, the entire point is to get rid of that confusion. So it
Right.
makes sense
Okay,
to make that clear. Yeah.
This was just it came off of this sentence in the same way you moved that framing up
Right.
into the list, right?
yeah.
All letters of reappointment. Oh, no, that's as soon as practical. When appointed employees shall be provided with criteria concerning reappointment. I think,
Go ahead.
no, I think having it there is similarly as vague as it was before.
Gotcha.
If you wanna add in a bullet point there, which mimics what you've added into the letters of offer, I feel like we'd be happy to look at that as
Okay,
well.
Yeah.
I'll make a little note on that. I mean, I like I said, I think it's okay. I just want to make sure that, like, as we go, because again, one of the things that, depending on the timing of when we get the contract wrapped up, we want to make sure that we do a really good job of communicating out these changes to all of the folks that are going to need to know them, so that our first set of letters right after this comply, because there's a lot of changes in Article
Yeah.
4, and we want to make sure that we do our dead level best to, conform to it immediately. We don't want to have a round like, oh, well, that was the first one afterwards, and, for a time period, we don't want people working off the old contract, I guess
Yeah.
is what I'm saying. So, appreciate that. Going down to, 4.5, Hannah, which I know was one that you guys had described that you had reasserted. I think here is, again, we have more of a comment than a suggested change, and, you know, we're good with this as long as the quote unquote written information that you all are expecting is going to be the basically offer letter, appointment letter, or reappointment letter, as opposed to us conducting sort of a PRR like email search, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I believe our,
Is that public records, PR?
Yeah.
Sorry,
I think our intent was, yeah, the things that have already been created, you know,
gotcha.
the appointment and reappointment that they've already received. and
Right,
things like
'cause like the example that we discussed was, okay, so let's say that Tom's my PI and I go and I send Tom an email and I say, hey, look, I'm not really sure. Or I have, you know, some questions about my appointment, and then we have a follow-up verbal conversation. That would probably be relevant written information, but we would have no easy way of, unless either of those people had raised that and you guys requested it,
Mhm.
we would have no way to know that that document really existed.
Mhm.
And
Right,
it wouldn't be because we didn't want to give it to you, it's because
Mhm.
unless we did an email search, we wouldn't even, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Does that
yeah.
make sense? Okay,
no,
I
I
think
think,
that's fine.
yeah,
okay. All right, so 4.7, here we go. Here is what I think what we can do is, I mentioned this last time. We don't really think that the university may curtail is dependent on the first sentence. So what I suggest doing is really more of a formatting thing, is taking away the A and just moving it to same part of the same paragraph and inserting the word additionally. So it looks like it's indented, but that's because I deleted the A.
right,
So it would just read as, no appointment shall create any right, interest, or expectancy of continued employment. Additionally, just as the next sentence, additionally, the university may curtail, diminish, or terminate appointment only by reason of any of the following. And then we left the rest of it the same. So I think it's a relatively minor
I think that's fine, yeah.
change. I think it accomplishes what we set out to do.
yeah,
And then that just leaves really 4.8, and I acknowledged in the comments here. Okay, so obviously we attempted to bring clarity and that didn't work, so we're gonna try again.
Mhm.
So here's what we did. We contemplated both cases. You had given your example last time, Hannah, and what we tried to do is capture that case in addition to the case we were describing. So now what it says is, continuing 9-month employees with assignments during successive academic years, we cut out that next part, may be appointed for the duration of the intervening summer term, provided that the employee continues to maintain satisfactory student status and in accordance with the following based on the situation. So A, and then you're gonna see that's kind of the part that we've been talking about. Employees who receive a summer term appointment that are either substantively different from their 9-month appointment and or assignment, or who are appointed in a different unit, may or may not be awarded a tuition waiver for the associated summer term at the discretion of the hiring unit. The hiring unit's decision to award or not must be provided to the employee at the time the appointment is offered. B was the case that you were contemplating last time, which is for employees who are receiving a summer term appointment that is not substantively different from their 9-month appointment and is in the same unit, the tuition waiver provisions of Article 11.2 apply.
Okay.
So what we tried to do, I'm sorry, go
Which
ahead.
means they should give us the waiver.
What is the definition of substantively different? Like if I'm an RA for my department and then in the summer the TA for my department, is that substantively different or?
That's a good question.
So if you're actually switching from I would ask Tom.
Yeah,
what you
yeah,
thought.
I think from a research assistant to a teaching assistant would be substantively different. Judy, any specific examples there?
So what it is, I think what's really gonna define it is, are you a 12-month or a 9-month RA?
Well, you'd only be 9 in this case.
Right.
Right, so, and this 9-month is both for RAs and TAs, Patrick?
Yes.
Okay, so substantially different. The example of moving from a RA to TA, I guess, is, but the reason why this came about is we had graduate students moving really to really different work and with different units as well, like they were kind of both. But I guess RA to TA would be that. I mean, I think that's something to discuss in the group.
Yeah.
I've not seen that. That's not been why this article came about.
Yeah, well, I mean, what is
Yeah.
your thought? I mean, what do you guys think?
I'm just thinking, cause like I've been through this, like I was an RA for my first 2 years. And then I switched to TA and that would imply that maybe I wouldn't get a tuition waiver. So like, I'm just thinking in terms of like, it would be relevant to me, but I did get a tuition waiver. I mean, it was maybe before this, so.
Are you talking specifically about summer terms? Or are you talking in general? Cause this is just contemplating summers for 9-month GAs who are working
I
between years.
I was 9 months
Right,
or a 9-month contract that I was given for the first 2 years. Summer appointments as an RA as well.
got it.
But then after my 2 years, so like in the spring of that last year,
Mhm.
I switched to TA, I believe, for this summer A or something like that.
Okay,
So the first one sounds like not substantively
Yeah.
different. The
Right.
second one sounds like substantively
Well,
different.
unless did you switch? Were you also switching for fall? Were you also,
Right.
like, were you
Yeah.
gonna be transitioning to a?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Actually, not just for the summer,
just for
but
the summer,
actually
but
that's your
permanently.
new gig.
Yeah, so I would say then that wouldn't be if
Correct.
you were transitioning from one completely to the other, it wouldn't be different.
Right.
You were just keeping to
Yeah,
do the
yeah.
research in the summer, but teaching in the fall and spring. Then that would be.
Like this summer is
substantively
just
different.
patching in.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Then you're gonna go back to what you were doing the prior spring.
Uh-huh.
Correct.
I think that's.
Because I think the key here is it's successive appointments, so you have to be 9-month with finishing one 9-month contract, going on to that same appointment that next fall as a 9-month. And the summer, there was really either nothing for you or you were picked up outside the unit to go work over in business or the museum or that.
And then
I'm talking about A only, sorry.
Right,
this might have been something that was discussed in like sessions that maybe I missed. But what is the rationale for not guaranteeing a tuition waiver?
no, it's a really good question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, one of the things that what we've identified, and it came to us from a couple of the different units. One of them being Whitney Lab, is they do not have the money to afford a tuition waiver. But they do have opportunities for work for GAs that they believe is meaningful and the GAs want to engage in. If they do not get a waiver, if they don't get a waiver for the waiver, I know it's kind of a weird way to say it, but if they're not able to carve out the waiver, then they can't afford to hire the GA and they're gonna wind up hiring somebody OPS, or they're gonna wind up hiring a staff person. So we were trying to be really careful about making sure that this wouldn't be a substitute for a 12-month GA who would get carved out of what the summer of the tuition, the waiver they would have already had. It only applies to 9-month GAs who don't have an appointment in the summer, so that they have an opportunity to do something that otherwise we wouldn't be able to offer them. That's kind of that's the intention.
Yeah, I think my two things on this, or maybe we clarified that it has to be substantively different from your 9-month appointment before and after that. summer
Yeah, I
appointment.
see, you could maybe put continuing in there for employees who receive different from their continuing 9-month appointment or
Okay.
something like that.
Yeah, and then the second thing is, I mean,
I don't know if that's
if the
right.
biggest thing that we're basing this off of is especially when it's between units. I mean, would it just be easier to clarify and say that it has to be a transfer between units? So one department is not, hiring its own GAs just for cheaper over the summer.
I'm sorry,
That-
Austin, explain
So,
it again.
I mean, a part of the thing is it has to be something different and/or associated with a different unit, appointed from a different unit.
Oh,
right?
so kind of back to Eva's point about if you're an RA, you can't TA inside your unit unless you get the waiver.
Yeah, basically, like if
Okay.
it's within unit hires, then you would keep the waiver, and then if only if it's outside the unit, would you even have that option? That would be a limitation on the language you have here.
It would be. I'm a little worried about units just switching GAs though.
Well, we also have GAs that are not GAs within their own unit for their original, like, So like we do have like English teaching over in different programs like for business. And so I wouldn't want business to think that, hey, now we don't have to give these people tuition. Like we're
Right.
trying to, like, I think we're all on the same agreement, like we don't
Yeah.
want units not paying the tuition. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
we want to recognize the uniqueness of a summer appointment that is completely, I mean, these aren't a lot, but they are really unique and they should be classified as a GA appointment. But we also want to make sure, like, yeah, to have an assistantship, you need to be maintain satisfactory student status and register accordingly, right? You can't not withhold the tuition waiver from that student.
Yeah, I explicitly, to your point, Austin, I mean, we are interested in discouraging and eliminating gamesmanship. Like, we don't want people to use whatever we create to figure out a way to try to artificially manipulate the system from the practice now. Like,
Right.
we don't want to do that.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I think we kind of share that interest. We're
Yeah.
not trying to create a loophole. And this was all the way back, if you remember the point that Jacob had made a long time ago, which was a valid point about, well, wait a second, we need to be really careful about closing any loopholes that people might start exploiting and saying, well, we're going to stop offering 12-month and only do 9 months just to save the money. So I think valid concern. And I think we want to work with you to say, okay, how do we make sure that we don't, by trying to make this exception, open the door too wide and allow people to start doing this when they wouldn't be doing it now?
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're on the same side, that we wanna, come to the same conclusion.
Right. How we actually word that to make sure that we don't, I mean, we're open to, if there's a different word or way to put it that you think does a better job, we're open to sort of hearing that.
Yeah, I think we'll take a look at this and see if we can't figure out
I
some.
want to clarify one thing,
Sure.
which is the unit can waive, or sorry, yeah, the unit can waive giving a waiver. But does that mean the student is required to pay out of pocket, or is it waiving it's not waiving the requirement for credit?
So it's a really good point.
Mhm.
We
Yeah.
very, very intentionally did not contemplate the student's academic responsibility for registration in the contract.
Okay,
Like, we had a lot of conversation about this,
Mhm.
and we want to make it very clear that the student's obligation to their program is not contemplated here. So if they have a program that requires them to register in the summer, then they have to register. If they have a program that doesn't require them to register in the summer, then they don't have to register.
To register to be a GA,
So
that's a term of
like
employment,
at
right?
least.
Yeah.
this is what we spent so much time
minimum.
talking. I'm gonna let you and Judy answer this question.
Right,
because-
Judy, so for those Whitney Lab students, what do they need to register in the
They,
summer?
they never had. So let me give the GA, the reason why this initially came about. Initially, this article came about as a kind of very broad thing. It came about because graduate students weren't making, or it was brought to this body by GAU stating students aren't making satisfactory progress. Because they're having to leave, these 9-month employees are having to leave to go home, work. I guess one example was they go home and lifeguard. I mean, it was a little unusual. And so we want to keep them here, be able to fund them because they still need funding, but we don't need to require, they've got enough credits, they can work, and what they would say is they would work on, and I'm doing air quotes, their own research. So the summer, the appointment was like for continuous 9-month, specifically TAs, okay? Who had a continuing appointment coming back the next fall, they could still remain here, receive their health benefits and their stipend, didn't need to register and work on their research. I think that was the original, close to as I can remember the language. Well, when I came into the grad school, what happened was that article got misrepresented. And we had 12-month RAs and departments and colleges saying, wait a minute, no, this is what, and it was allowed to happen for 12 months. And so then it just started snowballing, and until really Patrick came on board, was trying to really figure out, okay, what is this about? So then got to much cleaner when you guys agreed like, okay, it's really for these 9-month who are going to seek out these other research experiences that don't have a summer appointment at all, but they're gonna go do some completely other work, and this other work doesn't have, they're not looking to register, but they wanna get this work, and the work is classified as a GA. They are a GA, they're not OPS, they're not a student assistant, and so that was why this particular special class, if you will be able to be assigned as a GA to go out afield, and as long as they have another 9-month appointment back, continuous same 9-month appointment, then they can do this special appointment in the summer, and I believe HR uses the summer R hire file for them, and not be required or have the burden to register, and they can kind of use this research with them. And so that's kind of the history. It's not really for all those GAs, like other GAs follow the same, like whether you're 12-month or 9-month, and then you get a summer appointment. We've never had that kind of come into question with like Hannah, for your example, like class does their summer hiring of their TAs, they do a whole different FTE, usually a higher FTE because the teaching is condensed, because usually they hire them in an A or a B. So it's never really impacted them. It just always impacted these kind of unique group of people. If that at all makes any sense.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to talk about this a little bit, but yeah, I think the connections with student status, I think, is important, because if they're required to make credits, I think. I can't find it directly in the thing, but I believe we have to remain full-time student status to even continue being a GA in the slightest, to be governed by this contract.
Right.
So to say that they couldn't take credits, I don't know if we already have it where they can keep their health benefits over the summer for
Right.
100 years, but I think we have to make sure we're doing this, because we also have the language maintain satisfactory student status in here, right? So
Right.
does that imply that they would have to remain full-time?
Well, so the reason we put that was because if the program requires you to be registered,
Right.
in order to maintain student status, you would have to be registered.
Okay,
But if your program doesn't require you to be registered, you would be able to maintain satisfactory student status without being registered.
But
You know,
yeah, but I think that's something we gotta be cautious with, because we're saying a student not registered for any credits could be a GA, and that we gotta make clear that only in this particular thing, because I mean, a department could say, hey, you've exceeded 90, you don't need to register this semester, and then in a fall. We don't want them to
No.
consider being a GA.
No, that's why it's only specific to under summer appointments.
Only under this real specific
Yeah.
carve out.
Correct. It's only
Right.
summer.
Cause yeah, I worry about that too.
yeah, we don't want, that's not a road we want to go.
That's not,
and maybe that's something we just make more explicit in here as
Sure,
well.
Yeah.
I think would be, look, I think what's good about this is I think we're to a point with this where I think we all kind of understand. what we're
We just
trying
need to get it
accomplish.
worded right.
Yeah,
We just
Yeah.
want to make sure that for the sake of, if none of us are here, the next time this gets kind of talked about, we've done a good enough job of making it explicit that we didn't leave it up for interpretation. And again, the thing that we spent an incredible amount of time talking, not just among the team, but among other people out in the different units of the university who are interested in being able to utilize this is, again, we want to limit the gamesmanship, and we don't want to set up a set of rules or structures that it creates this interest in all of a sudden attempting to exploit it. It's not
right.
that we want to make sure that that's not what happens. So even if it's inadvertent, we want to guard against that.
Austin, can
Yeah.
are you guys thinking like in 4.8A, if a student, like, let's say they do need credits because their plan is to graduate in spring and they needed summer credit because they're going to do 9 in fall and spring, but they need like the 6 credits for summer to count to get them to their degree program number, they should have that option, that there should be some sort of request from the student to say, I know I'm out of field, I meet all of this criteria, but I really need to be registered for 6 credits this summer. Is that what you're thinking?
Well, I guess the concern is, on one hand, we don't want GAs to, you know, if they want to get paid over the summer and do this work, we don't want them to also say, well, we're not gonna give you a tuition waiver because we can't afford it, but you still have to take your 6 credits and then pay us the full tuition, because then they're ending up not making any money over the summer, right? We want to avoid those situations as much as possible unless the GA agrees.
Right.
But we also don't want to open the door, yeah, we, you know, we want to be very careful with our language to make sure that we're consistent, because we don't want this to be viewed as, you know, a department can say you don't have to take credits to maintain student status. And if in the rest of the contract, it says you just have to maintain student
Right.
status, are we opening the door for
Yeah.
departments to
That's what
not
that
apply them full
11.2
credit?
and
No.
B is,
Yeah.
it's like you've gotta be registered for what you need to be registered. for.
Yeah, so I think I think I just want to make it clear
Mhm.
what's expected of GAs
Yeah.
doing that stuff, so everyone knows what's going on. But I think we can work on some language and see what we can figure out for sure.
Thank you for that one. I think, like I said, I based on the amount of work that we've done on this one, I mean, I feel like we're about as close as we've gotten so far. I mean, I think we're down to, I'm hoping just kind of the last little pieces on this one.
Yeah.
Which is great, because we spent a lot of time on that one. Are we good to move on to 7?
Yeah. I think
Okay.
we're good.
So we've got, so what we have for 7, this was very helpful for us last time when we brought it just up for discussion as opposed to giving you a proposal and talk through some of what we're thinking. So if you would indulge us again to do that. So again, this isn't necessarily ready to be proposed, but we kind of want to show you what we are.
This is,
This
can you
is-
repeat that, sorry?
Sure, it's not, we're not, I don't think this is ready to be like, it's not ready to be a proposal, but I think that some of the components, based on some of our discussion last time, we want to show you some of the things that are important to us and see if we can't even maybe right here make some changes that you might find acceptable, because I think it's helpful at this point for us to, I feel like I've made some points verbally that we haven't actually put on the paper, and I think if you see them in writing, it may help us get towards a version that we both find acceptable. So if
Okay.
you'll just look down at, so first and 10, you know, we put the word contracted, but really what we want to talk about is what's in lines 20 through 23, and then in lines 30 through 42, or 30 through 37. So I think for 20 through 23, here's one of the components that is, we feel, a significant barrier to having an explicit definition of overwork. Oh, I'm sorry, Tom. I handed it to them. I didn't hand it to
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Is that the parties acknowledge that the time to complete assigned tasks varies based on a number of factors, including an employee's individual expertise, abilities, and experience, as well as the timing of completion of assigned tasks, which may be determined by the employee in some cases. And here's what I'm trying to say. And rather than just saying it again, I thought if I wrote it down, it may be something that you may find acceptable to in some way, shape, or form identify. Because last time I had brought up the fact that, look, people work differently. And when you start charting people's hours, there's just people that maybe give more focus and people that give less focus. And what is the quality of a worked hour? Because it's not really an hourly employee situation in some respects, but in other respects it is. So the opposite example is if I'm the case that I think you presented well, and I'll paraphrase is, look, if I'm a PI and I'm assigning you to do 1,000 iterations of a 7-minute protocol, I can very quickly extrapolate that is going to take me a minimum, even if it's perfect, of 7,000 minutes.
Right.
Okay. You can do the math and figure out that there's no way I'm getting that done in 20 hours if that's what I'm doing. For just kind of for an example. It's not quite so easy with other types of tasks that aren't necessarily time bound.
Mhm.
And if I am, and I'll use myself as an example. Back when I used to do a lot of extended response grading, if I did that grading in my office with no distractions, I could get through a certain amount in a given amount of time. If I did it on my couch at home with Netflix on, it would take me significantly longer. Both were acceptable, but it definitely throttled how much I could accomplish. So I guess that's one of the components that we want to just put out there in the context of how we effectively define overwork, because a significant component of those hours is up to the way in which the employee approaches what they're doing at any given moment. It's not a pure mathematical, every employee would accomplish the same amount in a given time. And I think, I don't know how best to capture that.
Can I offer you just
Sure.
a thought?
Yeah.
I think you're offering a more specific example than some of the ones we've talked about before, where we're talking about things that are overlapping in all of this
Mhm.
stuff, right? Where it gets into academic work. due to the nature of being a GA, we kind of have the freedom to work in different places
Right.
under different conditions.
Right.
And based on what you were just saying, I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, sorry.
But it sounds like what you're trying to say is if we're grading and watching TV, we could be working more than our contracted hours because we're working slower. But really, our contract says that we're cut off at a certain hourly point,
Right,
right? And this is getting into that salaried versus hourly
right.
issue. And so I think it would be important just to say very clearly, like, I mean, even if I'm grading watching TV, if I hit my 20 hours, I've hit my 20 hours, right?
I see, I think that's what's difficult is to make it an explicit. I mean, we don't really have any control over that. Your supervisor, because the other component is to your, I'm gonna stay with your example.
Yeah.
One of the big differences, and I think one of the ways we've sort of contemplated this, especially in some of the proposals that were hardwired, there was like a specific minute count was, look, if the environment in which the work was occurring was, you know, sort of the cliche widget factory, and there was direct, obvious methods of supervision the entire time the person was engaged in production, it would be very easy to see when somebody was or was not meaningfully engaged in their task. If their job was to, you know, spin a gear, pull a lever, whatever, that's not in any way, shape, or form the type of work this is.
Right.
So to say that it is the supervisor's responsibility to know that it's unreasonable, no, let me just
Yeah,
finish the
okay.
example, because I think this is more of an edge case, but I'm acknowledging it, it's an edge case. So if I have a TA,
Yeah.
in your case, who is telling me it's taking me 50 hours a week to get the grading accomplished, and I have other TAs who are able to get it done in the time allotted, if one of the factors were that they weren't engaged in a focused environment to accomplish the work, I'm not sure how the supervisor would know to be held accountable for the fact that they were quote unquote overworking the TA. If the person didn't raise their hand and say, it's taking me 50 hours. a week."
Focusing on the supervisor though, and that's when I waved my hand, you're asking, how could the supervisor know?
Right.
How could they be aware? How could they handle that?
Right,
But like, we have the freedom to be working how we are, and if we make it a more reasonable case, and we're back to average, so what if they're working 25 hours a week?
Mhm.
Consistently, right? So they're above the average, it's not I'm working 10 hours and like, it's not that, it's always 25, right? They are over.
Okay.
What? Kind of lost how to phrase this question, but like. The student feels like they're being overworked.
Mhm.
They are working 25 hours a week, right?
Right.
And maybe they're not as focused as someone else who can get it done faster, but they're being asked to do stuff that is more than their allotted hours. So like, why would that not be overworked? Because it is breaking this line in the
Sure,
contract.
sure. I think, so I think I appreciate the way you put that, because
that help?
here's what I would say. So it's actually a really good segue into, this is language we were sort of playing with.
Yeah.
If you look down in B, so, and I realize this wouldn't necessarily be acceptable. It was a thought for the purposes of us trying to continue the discussion moving forward. If after an employee meets with their supervisor, so this is contemplating in the context of what we've already sort of agreed to up in A, at least in principle.
Mhm.
If after an employee meets with their supervisor in accordance with 7.2A, they believe that they're not able to complete their assigned work tasks within their average contracted hours, which is what you were
Right.
just saying, they must report their concern immediately to the graduate coordinator and or the relevant administrator. So in other words, look, don't wait. And again, this is just at this point, this is just a concept, right?
Mhm.
Additionally, if an employee shares with their supervisor that they're unable to complete their assigned work tasks within their average contractual hours, that should be comma, lowercase t, the supervisor must take reasonable steps to either modify the assignment and or provide training
Yeah.
or guidance to increase the efficiency of completing the tasks. So what we're hoping to do is, in your case, open the door to the fact that there could be a contemplation that it could be a factor other than it's just too much work.
Mhm.
If I can focus, just going back for the relation of these two, and your example of grading papers and Netflix is one, but another is a key concept in here is training, and you mentioned that, and then expertise in the top. I mean, the idea of the graduate assistantship is you're also learning and you're getting better. So if you
Okay.
think about analyzing data, for example, like if you're a first semester person in a lab, it might take you a long time to analyze a data set. If you've done that type of project, you know, a year and a half, you know, in consecutive semesters, you might be doing that a lot faster. So I like the fact that this speaks to the training piece too. Like, so, you know, somebody who's been doing this for 2 or 3 semesters in a row, whether it's teaching or research, might be able to do a lot more. But the GA who's feeling at their first semester going, whoa, you know, everyone else in this lab is getting this done in 12 hours and it's taking me 25. There needs to be a mechanism for them to be like, I need time to train up on this,
Right.
because that to me is the essence of the assistantship versus just a regular job, is you are training, like that's part of the responsibility.
Yeah,
So I like the training and the expertise being factors, not just the environment, you know,
yeah, I think that
distractions.
what this doesn't account for
Yeah,
in the examples that we're talking about is the intentional bad actor. Where
Yeah.
I was saying before, where it's like, okay, so we, again, back to sort of my minutes protocol, where there's a PI who's like, I know, just even if everything goes perfectly, this is gonna take you 40 hours a week and I don't care, I'm just gonna tell you to do it anyway.
yeah,
Like, again, that's not what's contemplated.
Right.
That's not what's contemplated here. This is more about in the sort of more in the middle cases, as opposed to the one that's just an obvious dude. It's not possible to accomplish 40 hours of required work inside of 20 hours. It's not mathematically able.
and especially for, even if you're working your hardest for a first semester GA who doesn't know what they're doing,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think the thing where we're running into this wall a little bit for some of these discussions is, you know, how GAs are classified as making success and making progress, right? Are we based off of you work your 20 hours and that's good, or are you based off of the goals you hit and the progress you make, right? And for a lot of ways, GAs are treated as goal oriented, you know, you have goals to accomplish each week. And you know, if it takes you 25, 30 hours, that you have to do that even though you're only paid 20, right? That's where we run into this issue, because
Right.
I think, you know, we believe, and you guys can correct me if you disagree, is, you know, if you're paid 20 hours, I think the expectation should be to work 20 hours, regardless if you hit the goals that your advisor sets for you. If you're not hitting those goals that your advisor sets for you, then you have the repercussions, you know, for, you know, fixing those issues,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
But, you know, if you're at a job and you're said, you know, you're at a general 9 to 5, or, you know, you're working in a
Right.
fast food shop or something, and they say, hey, clean these shelves before you leave, right? And it hits 9 o'clock, it's the end of your time, and you
Yeah.
haven't cleaned all of them, you're allowed to leave, that's the end of
Right.
your shift. But for GAs, it's, you know, well, I hit the end of my shift, but I still have to do this.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, so we
And
wanna make
that's-
sure those
and I
things
think
are taken
that's a
care of.
challenge, because the supervisors or faculty who don't get to just say, I'm done, when
Right.
the shelves don't need to be cleaned, they still gotta publish, you get tenure, they gotta teach the class,
Right.
whether it takes them longer to grade or not, and that's probably the same mindset they're mentoring for better or worse. down.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've heard though, and what we are attempting to do here is, you know, I think that you all have done, and some of the folks that you also had come speak to us from the membership, that there is an inherent unease about raising your hand and saying,
Yeah,
this is taking me longer. Like, I don't want to be the one that's complaining. I don't want to be the one that's raising my hand. I'm intimidated to talk. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but basically I'm intimidated to raise the issue with my PI. You know, what we attempted to do here was put some structure in place to where there was an expectation that, again, that the supervisor would have to take steps if it was raised, and we tried to, and again, this was an attempt to sort of change the conversation and put it in a different respect regarding what we could conceptually believe that maybe identifying some supervisory response instead of just defining what overwork was. And this is the reason. What we talked about was, okay, so let's say that we get a definition that we agree upon of overwork.
Mhm.
It's not gonna actually address the issue that the person's still gonna have to raise their hand and complain. Like, they're still gonna have to say, I'm accusing, with this definition that we've agreed on, I'm accusing my supervisor of overwork. If instead, we could say, look, when this situation arises, this is the expected way to handle it so that you don't systematically continue to overwork the GA. And at the same time, in situations where there may not be a direct observable time frame, there's a mechanism by which the person would engage to talk to them in a meaningful way about, okay, well, let's go over what you're doing. How long is it taking you? What are the ways you're doing it? Do I need to train you or provide additional guidance? And I realize that may be somewhat Pollyanna based on some of the examples that you all have given, but I think that by looking at it in that respect, it tackles and addresses the fact that, one of the suggestions may be, we're going to suggest a different environment for you to do your work. Again, in my example of, well, okay, it's taking you much longer to grade. Where are you grading? Are you grading in the office or are you grading at home on the couch? Because I think that would be a reasonable suggestion. Like in the grand scheme of things, if I have a GA that's telling me it's taking them 25 hours to get all the grading done, and I think I would be able to say, well, let's talk about why that's happening. What are the ways in which we can help you get your hours under and either grade later, to Austin's point of, look, it's 20 hours cut off and be done, or, well, let's talk about, do we need to go over exemplars? Do we need to talk about, the annotation? I mean, all the various things that it could be.
I feel like for me, this is, I don't know if naive is the best way of describing what I think about this. But I feel like if you are working 25 hours because you are watching Netflix while you're grading, you're not, it's not the case that you are going to be like, okay, I'm gonna grieve this, right? Like, I
Yeah.
feel like this article, why it matters is so that the people that have good cases, that they are being overworked by their PIs, not because they are watching Netflix while they're
Right.
working, but because they have to be in their lab with their specimens or whatnot, because they're honorary, and at the same time, they are being pushed to like publish and analyze data and like work with these specimens and so on and so forth, and it takes them like 60 hours a week. That they can go to this article and say, here, Patrick, like, these are all the ways in which I am overworked.
Okay.
And that once they've made the hard decision of being like, okay, I'm going to like go against my PI, who's going to be the chair of my MA thesis and my dissertation committee, and the one who's gonna write me for letters of recommendation for me to later get a job. Take the brave decision of like kind of throwing them under the bus, right? This person that they depend on. That they can have an article that is going to like actually side with them, right? Not side with them just because of whatever, but because they actually have a case of overwork, right? This I feel like is naive because it does think that, oh, overwork happens because they're watching Love is Blind while they're grading. That's not what we're saying. And there's two things that I'm like, about. One is obviously the and or provide training or guidance to increase the efficiency of completing tasks. I don't like that. If I'm being overworked and I go to my PI and they tell me that I'm just not reading fast enough or writing fast enough and that I should, do this and that I might already be doing, or maybe it doesn't work for me because it takes me a different amount of time. It doesn't take me 30 minutes to write an introduction. It takes me actually like, I don't know, 4 hours to write an introduction, or more. Like, that is not gonna cut it. The providing training, or guidance on how to increase my efficiency. I like the other part of like the supervisor must take reasonable steps to modify their assignments, like I appreciate that part. But as long as there's and or there on like provide guidance to increase efficiency, I feel like this is not going to cut it. The other one is like, I don't like the must report, like. And I know that, you're saying this is not like your proposal per se, but like your thoughts on it. I feel like the must there kind of implies that they have had to like report this, and that there has to be a track record of them reporting this to their PI before they can even like grieve it or something. Which I don't know if I'm comfortable with. It might be that in most cases it is the way that it happens, but I don't know. I don't, yeah, I feel like it creates like weirdness, it creates weirdness in the article
I
more
appreciate
than
that.
resolves it.
I appreciate that. I think one of the things that we're wrestling with to some extent is the fact that there seems to be, I guess, maybe a lack of philosophical acknowledgement that people work in at different speeds and with different abilities, and that there seems to be an assumption that the PIs are responsible for, knowing immediately what those differences in ability are. So I'll give you a different example. So it doesn't matter whether it's RA or TA, it doesn't matter. If I have a lab of six RAs, or I have a bunch of sections that I'm teaching and I have TAs teaching it. And let's say that, just for the sake of this, my example, 5 of the RAs are able to give them all the same amount of work. 5 of them are able to finish it within the amount of time and say they're okay, and 1 of them does not. The assumption is that the PI is the one, based on some of the proposals that we've seen, I think the proposal is, well, the assumption is the PI is overworking them. Whereas what we would like to do is encourage a conversation between the person who says it's taking them too long to do it and their PI. Because in that example, and I appreciate that you're saying that may be a naive example, so I'll take that, but indulge me for a minute. How would, if the other GAs are able to accomplish that and the one is not, it's not a fait accompli that the PI is intentionally overworking them.
Can I try to build on some of the points that you were making?
Sure.
I think in the idea that Ava said, right, that like the way that this is written doesn't necessarily support someone who's coming to
Right.
try to grieve over.
Sure.
I think, in my opinion, what it is doing is it is contemplating the responsibilities of the supervisor or the PI. And I
Right.
think in your example you just gave, you're also really focusing on the role of the supervisor there.
Mhm.
And I think at least us, and speaking for other GAs, like, we want this to contemplate us.
Okay.
Does that make sense? We're not worried about scapegoating PIs who are mean, like, I don't think we're doing that.
Okay.
What we want is that if an individual, right, a GA is overwhelmed, let's
Mhm.
use that word,
Okay.
right? Instead of overworked, they're overwhelmed. They are working above their hours.
Okay.
We want this to contemplate them. To say like, hey, if you are working over your hours, sure, it can say you should talk to your supervisor, but we want to give them a definition
I got
that
you.
they can acknowledge, okay, I'm not crazy. Like, I'm overwhelmed and I'm working over
Yeah.
my hours.
I get it. I
Okay.
think I understand that. I think here's the rub for us in that scenario.
Yeah,
That situation in which a GA finds themselves,
right.
we believe that it's a reasonable possibility that it may be the result of choices that they are making about the way that they approach their work.
Right.
And we would like to explore that as a possibility before we just say, oh, well, the person's clearly being overworked.
So,
But the thing is, like, if they are working 20 hours or 25 hours on average, they are being overworked, like, and you can. And I feel like we're evaluated every year, right? Isn't that a better place to sort of be like, give the space for PIs to determine whether that's I'm making progress enough or I'm working well enough, other than like, other
It's a
than
really
the
good point.
overwork.
It's a really good point, but I'm gonna go back to the example I gave before, which is Hannah contemplated the freedom of working in this sort of environment and the way that you wanted. You can't, I think it's problematic to say, we want to have a significant amount of independence in terms of where we sort of dictate how we work or when and where we work.
Right.
But also to unilaterally determine whether or not it's taking me too long. So the supervisor can't actually watch them work in that example. They don't have access to watching them work. The only way they would be able to evaluate them would be to look at the tasks that they completed in that environment. The supervisor can't watch them and be like, why don't you grade that paper? I'm gonna watch you grade papers for the next 3 hours. This does not happen. This is not a practical thing that people do. Maybe they should, to your point, in terms of overseeing the work of the GA.
Oh, wait, I'm not saying that they should be watching them.
No, but what I'm saying is you say, well, they should evaluate them. Well,
They do,
Okay.
we get evaluated.
what I'm saying is, if it's set up to where a TA is not actually being required to conduct their work in front of their supervisor's not actually watching them do their work.
Uh-huh.
When they evaluate them, they have to evaluate them on tasks completed and product produced, not on the method by which they're working.
Right.
So it can't be both. You can't say, you don't get to tell me how to do my work and only grade me on my completed tasks, but then I tell you how long it takes me. And you're not allowed to comment on how I'm working. Like it can't be, you can't control both sides of the coin.
You asked us to acknowledge that.
Yeah,
I think we acknowledge that people work at different speeds,
right.
right? That is clear. The issue here, right, that we're trying to raise is, and we've tried to say this before when we've said, and Ava even literally said it earlier, you don't have to grieve. Like, having this in here doesn't force a GA who is overworking because they're
Right.
working slow. Like, this doesn't force anyone to do this.
Right.
Right.
Right? And so you might work slower one week. That doesn't mean you're gonna grieve that you're being overworked. We're really interested in situations where GAs are consistently being
Yes,
overworked.
you made that clear.
I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like I don't. We get evaluated on the products and how we do. You know, on as a TA or as an RA or
Right.
both even. And then that, and we don't have the right to be renewed and we can get fired and so if a GA is literally overworking themselves because they are watching Netflix and they're not getting things done. One, I don't think that they're going to be grieving being overworked, but second, that gets then evaluated. So it's, what do you mean? We have evaluation
But
letters.
in
At
your
the end, at
example,
the end of the term.
yeah, but the
And,
only way
yeah.
we'd be able to evaluate it is based on what they produced. So what you're saying is they should just not finish the class and not finish the grading. And then the evaluation would show out that they didn't finish it?
Well, first of all, I don't think that's happening, without them getting like fired, but.
Yeah.
And I mean, and you're the one that hates like hypothetical scenarios, but, I feel like this. The way that you're putting things is again, putting the onus on GAs to prove time and time again that they're being overworked, right? Instead of providing, and then giving, UF the exit or escape route of being like, you're just not working effectively enough. So it's not protecting GAs. And this is a place to protect GAs from overwork and giving them what they need to grieve it if they want to grieve it. I don't like the example of GAs watching Netflix and therefore they're not getting their work done, because I don't think that that's. ever been a case for a grievance.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Based on this language.
Mhm.
If we had, I'm not even gonna give you an example. If there's a GA who thinks they're being overworked.
Mhm.
How could this kind of language, and I know that this is just a discussion. Like, how do you envision this supporting them?
So what, I think it supports them. A couple things happen. First of all, it does, to Eva's point, they have to raise their hand and tell their supervisor, I'm being overlit. I can't get done what you told me I need to get done. I'm only
Right.
supposed to work 20 hours a week. I can't get it done on average. I can't get it done. Can we please talk about my assignment? And whatever the assignment is, there would be a discussion. The supervisor is supposed to respond to that. If that doesn't help, and the supervisor doesn't take reasonable steps to modify the assignment or provide some sort of training or guidance,
Okay,
then
then
I
it could be grievable. at that
absolutely,
point.
Oh, yeah.
absolutely.
Okay,
And
Yeah.
frankly, I think it would accrue to the employee's account in the consideration, the weighing of the grievance that like I said, look, I told you I wasn't getting it done. You have an obligation to take steps. And the reason, and I appreciate your point, Eva, but because I think that we want to open up the possibility that it could be either or it could be both. It could be a combination of the PI just straight up asked, it didn't matter. It's an inhuman amount of expectation. No one could ever get it done.
right,
Immaterial of experience, expertise, whatever. Like, so that is certainly a case. But it could also be a case that the person is either so new or so inexperienced in doing it that they need to either practice or approach it differently, or they need it to be modeled for them, or they need to be scaffolded in some sort of way to improve their efficiency. And I think that it's reasonable to believe that both of those cases could exist.
for sure.
It's not all taskmaster PIs who are, in a Spartacus sort of way, forcing all of the GAs to work 60 hours a week in the lab. I'm not saying that hasn't happened.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just saying that I think that the continuum of examples and the employees that we need to contemplate and protect is along a continuum. That's all we're trying to say.
So if I
And
tell
that-
my PI, sorry, Tom, if I tell my PI I'm working, I can't get this done. And they respond and they're like, do this to be efficient, and I do this or try to do it, and still can't get this done, I'm still working over 20 hours. Tell them again,
Mhm.
you're just not being efficient enough. Tell them again. They
So
tell me you're not being efficient
I would
enough.
case it out
It's
for the
not-
first time, I wouldn't go
Yeah,
3 times.
it's not a waiver to 7-1. None of what we've started to put together conceptually in lines 30 through 36 is a waiver to 7-1. It's not designed to be that way. We don't intend it to be that. The ability to not only assign the work, but to accomplish it within the contracted hours is a joint responsibility. The employee has an obligation to do the assignment, but the supervisor also has an obligation to design the assignment in such a way that it's reasonably accomplishable in the contracted hours done.
I like that way of framing it, because you're right. I mean, we're coming at it from management side, you're coming at it from employee, and I like both there's responsibilities on both sides, and I actually like the part where it says that the employee, the GA must report it, because back to your question, how's this protect them? They can actually go in and be like, look, contract says I have to report this. I mean, this I would think would have teeth with the supervisor, and if it doesn't, then there's a case for a grievance.
It's never going to ameliorate the concerns that we've talked about this entire time, where there's a level of power differential and there's an
Right.
intimidation factor. I mean, I don't know if there's any way that we could ever ameliorate. I don't think we can ever completely eliminate that. I just don't think it's possible.
So after the second time of them, so after I tell them again, after they've told me to be more efficient, that I can't get this done, or your idea of efficiency is not realistic, let's say that.
Can we go with your example for a second? Because it
Sure.
doesn't, the language that we put down there doesn't say, just tell the GA to be more efficient. That's not what it says.
I mean, it says guidance to increase the efficiency of
Yeah,
completing the
it's more
task.
substantive than just work harder. I mean, I don't think that if that's the
I
response of
mean,
the
no,
PI.
but I'm telling you,
Okay.
it often is that. The
Okay.
guidance of efficiency, of increasing efficiency is like,
Just get it done faster.
get it done faster, produce more. I don't know, like, change your setting. Maybe you're already working in the office that doesn't have any windows. Like, I don't know, maybe you're already like working day and night. Well, after that, whatever the guidance to increase efficiency is. Per your thought experiment. After that. After I tell my PI again, hey, it's still taking me more than 20 hours. Is that, would you then side with the GA in the grievance process?
Well, there's actually two problems now, because in addition to working more than 20 hours, then in that example, the supervisor didn't take reasonable steps, because inherently the whole concept of reasonable steps is that whatever guidance and change or modification they provide, or training or guidance they give, is supposed to effectively get the GA under the threshold of the contracted hours. If it wasn't effective in making any improvement, then clearly the steps that were taken weren't reasonable, because they weren't able to get under the hours. But again, I don't want to objectify the GA in this case, because this is not things that are just happening to the GA. The GA is not an inert component of, it's a dynamic process, right? I mean, the GA also has the ability to affect the situation. It's not all things that are just happening to the GA. A lot of external forces are at play, but the GA also has the ability, the employee has the ability to respond to whatever the suggested guidance is.
Right.
And hopefully it's helpful. And if it's not, then the problem persists.
I think maybe we should talk about this.
I think we're gonna have to, yeah,
Yeah,
and
Do you have cases of grievances that have come up? Not recently.
I've never had I've never seen I've never seen a workload grievance, which is one of the things we've been talking about from the very beginning is
because,
the GAU doesn't seem, we're not clear how to bring one. It doesn't seem like the language supports us, even if we were to bring it, people are intimidated by their PIs. I mean, again, this is just sort of the things that we've sort of heard.
right,
Um,
I think looking at 7.1. Right, this idea of you're working an average number of hours. And we're not keeping track of our hours, right? Because we're not clocking in.
Right.
It's not, you're working from 8 to 10, like, it just isn't that clean.
right,
And so it becomes impossible, right, to bring a grievance on this kind of language. And so really what we want is something that if we get brave enough and we're feeling stressed enough, that it's worth it to bring a grievance, to overstep all of that
Right.
stuff that
Yeah.
you just listed, right? To get there, that this gives us something
right,
to point out and say, look, I
Yeah.
am actually, like, this has been broken.
Right.
right. Yeah, no, I
agree
think
with that.
it's a valid point. I think we understand the sentiment.
Yeah,
I think what is unclear to us
right,
is how you need anything other than what's already written in lines 5 through 7. I don't know how any of the stuff that we've seen down below enhances or guarantees anything besides what we already have there in current contract language.
I mean, something that we had was like a delineation of academic credits too. I thought that was
Mhm.
pretty great. If you are especially an RA and you're doing dissertation work that is similar to your RA work, and your PI is saying you need to do this, this, and this, and that is your paid work, but it also is your RA work, so as
Wait,
seven point
paid
two,
work and RA work.
sorry, research, you
Okay.
know, dissertation work. 7.2 says you don't wanna impose a limit on the amount of academic work necessary for an employee to make satisfactory academic progress or their graduate degree. So now there's no limit to how much my research can take,
Or
but
how much your research you're getting paid for.
Right,
what do you mean?
Because if it's, the overlap also works that you're doing dissertation research and getting paid for that.
Well, for
So the
20
limits
hours.
work, the limits work both directions.
No, but we're part-time workers, as you guys say,
And then
right?
20 hours, and then that comes back up
Right.
to 7.1.
And Tom's pointing out the example that you guys said, and you brought the member from the College of Medicine who had said, when we asked him, we're like, look, let's say that you weren't a GA and you were just a PhD student. How many fewer hours would you work? He said, well, no, I'd work the same number of hours, whether or not I was just a PhD student or I also had a GA shift. I think that's what Tom's kind of highlighting is, okay, well, wait a second. It can't be both. Like you can't, like if your academic program is requiring that level of intense like commitment, and I can't remember exactly, I know that he was in a lab, he was watching samples and studies and this other kind of stuff, and it was kind of I don't know how unique of a situation it was or not. But if irrespective of whether or not he's a GA, his program and academic studies are going to require, I think he used the number 75 to 80 hours a week, which seems like a lot. But he said during a session, it's not a function of him being a GA, it's a function of what his program requires. I don't know how to,
Exactly, so that is being a full-time, you're basically doing full-time work, full-time research work.
As part of your
It's-
training for your PhD,
Yeah,
not as part of your
Sure, it's
employment.
still providing a service to the university and to the academia anyway.
Ava, do you mind if I,
Sure.
so like, my wife does literally like within, not in the same concentration, but in the same program. It's
that's
the
stuff.
person you're talking about.
Okay,
She does that stuff. She grows cells and does that, right?
right,
She's in a wet lab,
okay,
okay? And the way that you asked that question was how different would the hours be, right?
Yeah.
Basically was the question you asked. And he said none. And I just wanted, can I clarify what that is a little bit
Sure.
for you so that it's a little less
Yeah.
squishy and weird? Basically, all of the research, so kind of what Ava was just saying, right? The research that my wife does goes into her papers. And it also goes into her PI's grants.
right,
Right? And we've had this conversation.
Right.
And so you are saying it goes in both directions, and that's
Right,
true,
right.
right? But my wife does work 50 to 60 hours a week. And she technically gets paid for 13.3 hours. She's on a
Right.
0.33 FTE.
okay,
Right.
And she would not bring a grievance if we put a definition of overwork in here. Because she's supported and all of this stuff, right? Just to bring it back home to kind of
Yeah.
the core theoretical thing that we're talking about,
Yeah.
right? Sure, I'm sure that she, of her 60 hours a week, and let's bring it down, let's say 50 hours a week, it's more than 40,
right,
right? I'm sure that 13 of that is technically going to her PI, but like what?
parsing it is almost impossible.
It's almost impossible.
Yeah.
And that's, if you remember back to when we were talking about this before, we were talking about those cases where it's
Right,
really hard to differentiate.
Right,
And all of the training and all of the research supports both sides.
mm-hmm,
And again, if we put a definition in here, it doesn't mean we're gonna get a million grievances.
right,
Because in those positive situations, in that nice lab, where you're even working 60 hours a
Right.
week, you're not gonna grieve, you're not gonna go against your PI, who sits as your advisor on all of your committees
Right.
and
Mhm.
supervises you in all of these cases, right? My wife would have to be there 50 hours a week if she was not a GA. And in that situation, her PI would still be using those like figures that she's creating for his grants,
right,
right? And so when he said I would be working the same amount, the
Right.
PI would still be gaining unless they tried to do some sort of really weird split and he
Yeah,
said,
yeah.
all this research belongs to me, which wouldn't be true anyway.
right, yeah,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
that's helpful. So I think I'm gonna connect that, because I think that's helpful and instructive. And I wanna connect that to something Eva had said about grievances, because here's what I think is transparently the worry is if there's an expectation that there is a type of grievance that is an automatic grant
Mhm.
without any weighing and sorting of the facts of the case, that is language that's difficult for us. So what I'm saying is, to your point of, if we were to set the language up in such a case that it's like, if the following conditions are met, this is an automatic winnable grievance, as opposed to, we don't have to say in every provision, if this provision is violated, you're always allowed to bring a grievance. But what you guys are grappling with is, when is it reasonably winnable? not when are we allowed to bring a grievance, because you're always allowed to bring a grievance, but what you're looking for is having a clear pathway of understanding. When would the university interpret this grievance as grantable? If that makes sense.
But you've made the case that that is true with like CCL where it just says like the FTEs. That if I show that I'm working more than 20 hours a week on average, that is a grievance. And that is, that is all I need to prove,
Well,
to prove it, right?
no, but I'm acknowledging what I think that I'm hearing you guys ask for is more guidance and understanding for in contract language that would help point possible grievance to having better standing for winning their grievance.
Right, to have something to grieve even, to bring a case. Because let's use my wife as an example, and going back to what Tom has said, right? It's hard to parse those hours. What of those research hours are the working hours? Which of
And
those
that- yeah,
research
that-
hours are the academic
Right,
hours?
right, and I think that's the question, and that's what I was hoping this would do a little bit more, that, hey, if you ask for that, the first responsibility starts going on the supervisor. Hey, tell us how this is parsed and show us how, and then that becomes that would be admissible for evidence, if you will, in the grievance.
It would certainly be more compelling as you weigh the evidence.
Right, but at least there is a responsibility on the supervisor to say, here's the part that's the research and here's the part that, or. Because when I've had these informally, and granted, very different, not wet ladder
Right.
scenario, and where I've been an associate dean and students have come, I'll actually go to the faculty member and be like, they're 0.25, 10 hours a week. Tell me what they're supposed to be doing in that 10 hours. And very often, no one's ever actually thought about that. Like, I don't know, they're doing one thing, like, no. And sometimes just that conversation gets you there, fortunately, before it becomes a grievance. But I'm hoping this would be a mechanism to have that conversation. And again, the responsibility working both ways, for the student to bring it forward, but then for the supervisor to at least have to explain, what is your model here? Because the student's only getting paid for 10 or 20 hours a week. Can you tell us what that 20 hours a week is?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
In this discussion of like, what could we put on paper?
Yeah,
So the previous thing that you brought, I think it might be crossed out, right?
Mhm.
Excess workload is defined as explicit assignment of employment responsibilities that
Yeah.
exceed the average contracted hours.
yeah.
If we were to work on this and take this language that you're bringing and kind of construct something that's like, it's being asked explicitly to do more, then they need to do, like, if we kind of enumerated the steps that needed to be taken, which is really what this version is doing, right? It's kind of enumerating steps. You
Mhm.
need to bring it to the supervisor needs to do this, it needs to be brought to this person. If we were to kind of finagle a new version of this that kind of puts both of these strategies together,
Mhm.
where it does say excess workload is being explicitly asked to do more than you are, and this should be handled by the supervisor, and here are the steps that should be taken. Is that something that you would even consider, or are you
Yeah.
pulling back on the idea of this part at all?
So I think we're interested in any take on it. The reason that we moved away from what was in lines 37 through 39 is we had a very robust conversation about the sort of difficult to define component of the work that is determined by the employee. That is where we're kind of struggling. That is where we're struggling. Because I think, going back to sort of Eva's question about, well, what happens in a grievance? Whoever is hearing the grievance should be asking that question. Well, let's examine how okay, so you're saying it's 30 hours a week. Let's talk about where are those 30 hours being spent? What are you doing? And looking at comparators. So what are the other employees who are tasked with the same or similar? How long is it taking them? What training have you had? Like, these are all the things that are going to come up anyway, or at least they should. But I think the other thing that we're very interested in doing is quickly exposing, I said this before, I think what we're interested in doing is quickly exposing bad actors.
Okay.
In other words, situations in which the tasks that are being assigned are on their face unreasonable.
Yeah. There's, in this discussion, I want to acknowledge what you just said. I hear that. What I was trying to say earlier, and I want to just very clearly reiterate one more time, is that to us,
Mhm.
right? The reality of the situation, if our supervisor's asking us to do way too much, or if we're unable to do it in the same amount, that overwhelmed, overworked feeling
Mhm.
in practice, right, in the embodied form of it is the same. And I understand the responsibility goes onto different parties, but the
Right.
reality is the same.
Mhm.
And so I think we need to just figure out how to offer you both sides, because we're really interested in the GA side, and it seems like you guys are really interested in the employee side, or like the supervisor
Yeah, there
side.
are, there's some of the labs, and sometimes they do it well, they'll have a contract for somebody working in the lab, and it usually will have responsibilities of the PI and responsibilities of the GA, like, I don't know if that may not be good best practice.
I don't think we
for a
wanna, I
company.
don't think we wanna
have a con-
mandate that, but I mean.
No, but I mean, that type, that approach to wording, like, here's,
Yeah.
here's the responsibility of the GA, here's the responsibilities of the supervisor. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I think too, the other thing that I wanna say, and I know it may not come across that way, so, but I'm gonna say it explicitly anyway, is all the way back to one of the first, look, we want our supervisors to be abiding by the contract. And one of the things that isn't good is if we have a GA who is, for whatever reason, is being overworked for an extended period of time and is winding up in that overwhelmed place. That's not to anybody's advantage.
Sure.
Nobody wins. So figuring out how to create an environment and a dynamic that allows that person to become known more quickly
Mhm.
is to everybody's advantage, if that makes sense. How we do that is, I think, what we're trying to sort of wrestle with. And then the weighing and sorting of quote unquote whose fault it is kind of
It's
the
the
other,
previous
is the other, exactly, is the other part of it. So,
Do you mind? We have two people who would like to speak. Would you be open to hearing them in this discussion,
yeah,
sort
that's
of?
fine.
That's per minute or two each.
I
That's
know
fine.
you wanted to say something a long time ago. We made eye contact. Would
Yeah.
you like to go first? And then we have someone on Zoom as
Yeah.
well.
Sure.
I'm just sort of struggling to understand, so I'm bringing into this my experience in my lab, which might be different. But you were mentioning, right, it could be a problem of efficiency, like they don't have the skills, could be a problem of needing training. So in our lab, we have someone who graduated a couple of years ago, who was assigned tasks that she consistently could not complete in her allotted hours. It was interfering with her distinct research, which is kind of a rare case that you can make that distinction. And she was an English language learner, right? Of course, it took her longer to relate some things than it took other people in the lab. What it sounds like to me, and I guess this is clarification, is you're arguing that the advisor could offer some sort of training, but still expect that person to accomplish the work in the same amount of time that like a native English speaker would, because they need training.
Offer the training or could adjust, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that's what the orders
both are available. At the end of the day, to your point, like I said before, it's not a waiver for 7.1. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that just because there was guidance or training offered, that we then get to have the person work more than the time they're supposed to. That's not the goal.
I'm unclear on how we understand what like an acceptable level of that is, because to your point, right, we can't sort of observe all parties in this.
Right.
If we're allowing for the possibility that in the initial complaint, it's a problem of the student not having like time management skills.
Right.
That's still a possibility after the like advice or training. has
Sure.
been. So at what point does it actually cross a line where it's like,
Yeah.
no, that isn't good, like it just didn't work?
No, I think it's a good point. I think what we were trying to sort of conceptualize is create what Hannah was kind of like, sort of a step-by-step framework that would hopefully support and help identify where the problem actually lied. And also provide the GA with the framework to say, look, you told me to have a conversation with my PI. I did that. I'm still working 30 hours a week.
Yeah.
They were responsible to give me training and I did the training they said, and you know what? I'm still working 30 hours a week. What are you gonna do to help me? So that it would, at that point, it's more,
So at a systems level, it feels like though, it's easier to shift the blame onto a graduate student than onto the faculty, right? It's easier for the entire institution to say, like, you should have taken the advice better, or like, have you tried the Pomodoro method, than it is to, in some way, discipline a PI, or, and so to me, I don't see standards in this language that would actually ensure that the graduate student doesn't get scapegoated.
I appreciate that, but I will also tell you that I don't think that I think we all have to acknowledge that both are possibly true. It could be either, or it could be both. It could be an unreasonable assignment. It's possible that
Right.
it's an unreasonable assignment and the GA has no issues whatsoever. It's possible that the assignment is perfectly reasonable and the GA is not doing well. It's also possible that the GA is not doing well and the assignment's unreasonable.
Mhm.
You know, I think that all of those are possible. So to construct it in such a way that it's predeterminative of one or the other, I think whatever we construct has to allow for both possibilities.
Sure, but, what that leaves is like an extremely narrow edge case of like, we're giving you work where we know how long everything absolutely takes. And we can prove mathematically, you know, it goes over your 20 hours. That's like a teeny tiny narrow sliver of.
But
what-
in, I don't mean to interrupt you, but in this scenario that we're talking about, where we enumerate steps, if all of those steps get met,
Mhm.
you're now at the threshold where you can grieve.
That's true.
And so you do need to produce the evidence, right?
Right.
That, then we go to the grievance process.
Right.
And so you need to provide, hey, I saw my supervisor, this is the training I did, this is the steps that I took, like, it does go on us, right, to provide all of that evidence. But hopefully, if all of that is recorded, and we enumerate a process and we have this recorded record, that does go a long way in supporting that grievance.
I guess that makes sense. I think what I'm trying to express is that sort of coming at this as a scientist, you're sort of trying to prove two theories of the case. One, that the advisor is intentionally overworking. One, that the responsibility, at least predominantly, lies with the graduate student. Those are actually both unprovable theories. And so I don't understand what the clear guidelines are.
So I think it's a fair point. I do think inherent in the grievance process is, unless it's a case of discipline or termination, the responsibility inherent in the grievance process lies on the grievant to begin with. Like that is the sort of overarching structure of the grievance process. So I think, to your point, it does align with that. But again, providing a structure that is a more clear pathway, as opposed to, I think we all acknowledge, we haven't had any grievances, but there's clearly overwhelming concern about the topic. You know, so I think that's what we're trying to wrestle with, is figure out, is there a way by which we can increase the comfortability of someone bringing the issue forward,
Right.
and at the same time, like I was saying before, acknowledge that both, it's possibly just a PI who's being unreasonable. It's possibly just a GA it's not that they're not working hard enough, maybe they're not working smart enough, maybe whatever, they need more
Or
training.
they just can't do it.
Or they just can't do it,
Yeah.
or it's both.
And
Can I ask, so during the grievance, this is a quick question, I swear.
It's okay.
During the grievance process, let's say we're at the threshold, right? Like I told my PI, I'm overworking. The PI's like, do this to be more effective.
Mhm.
I do it. Let's say Pomodoro method, for instance. I do it. I'm like, I'm still overworked. I file a grievance.
Uh-huh.
It gets to you. Are are you going to be like, how can you prove that you actually did the Pomodoro method and that you did it properly? Or are you just going to be like, okay, you did what your PI suggested for efficiency, it didn't work, and therefore, you know, it, like, your assignments have to be modified now.
Well, so the answer to your question is, it's a question of which contract provision is being violated. Because it's not about whether or not you did what your PI told you. That is a method to try to get the situation back in alignment with the contract. So the grievance is not about like who told the truth. The grievance is about making sure that whatever is occurring in the working conditions are aligned with the contract. So even if all that other stuff being the case, again, like I said before, if you are still if you're working above, it's not a waiver to 7.1. If you're working more than 7.1, then the question in the grievance process is what remedy are you seeking to ameliorate that allegation, which is I'm being forced to work more than what I'm allowed to under 7.1.
And I have done this, and
Uh-huh.
this, which is outlined, and
And-
I'm still working more.
And their methods for controlling for some of the other, weighing and sorting, not whose fault it is, but what are the factors at play?
Okay.
I think we should move on. You guys are good? Natalia's not, in the
It's no
Zoom
longer
anymore.
here.
Yeah, I
Okay.
checked. Yeah.
I appreciate, just before we close,
Yep.
I appreciate the opportunity to sort of have the conversation. I mean, I think we are still interested in getting something that's workable, and I do, hopefully to some extent with just sort of having the discussion, we've maybe done a better job of identifying some of the concerns we have with some of the proposals we've seen before, and if it's been at all instructive, then we thank you for the time spent on it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so we do have one for you,
Okay.
today, so I'll get that sending
okay,
out real quick.
which one is it?
It's gonna be Article 8,
Okay,
but, before we, talk about that, I'd be remiss if I didn't, talk to you about Article 10.
okay.
We gave you guys a proposal, was it last week? It must have been last week, just asking where that's at, or, what UF's position on
Yeah,
that is,
so, I mean, if you were under the impression that we were holding out Article 10 counters based on language concessions, I don't know, that wasn't a thing. Like, we're not holding out a response on Article 10 to try to get you to make more language concessions. We bargained Article 10 based on Article 10, not based on trying to get you to make changes on other stuff. So like,
Are you bargaining Article 10?
we are bargaining Article 10. We've given you a last best final on Article 10.
That's bargaining.
I don't want to engage in the wordplay again. I know you want me to say something. I don't know exactly what you're trying to get me to say, but I don't know how many times you want to answer the question. I know you don't like the definition of last best final. I know you think that's not bargaining. You've said that on the record multiple times. It's fine. We are never going to agree on whether it's the process of bargaining, what words mean, and sort of, I mean, I don't know how else to explain myself. You
Okay.
want us to counter your proposal for Article 10. You have our last best final on Article 10.
Okay, so you're rejecting our last proposal that we gave you last
Yes.
week. Okay, that was not clarified last week.
Okay.
That's why I brought this up to have the
Okay, fair,
discussion.
that's a fair question. Austin.
And our point, I do not want to have another 20-minute conversation
Yeah.
about this, but we will reiterate that, we are far away from having an agreement on that. I think we can
I-
agree that we're far away from.
I agree that
finding
we
a
are,
TA.
I agree that we are far away.
And, we don't see from this side of the aisle, how you plan to help us get to that end goal. You've made it clear, this is your road, this is where you're standing,
Mhm.
right? That doesn't help us at the bargaining table to find a middle ground, a middle ground. I know we don't like that terminology, find a place where we can TA, right? Find what that's going to look like, right?
I
So
understand.
we have made multiple offers, we've given them to you, we've made those things. So like, I would love to have a discussion on how you think we get to a TA at the end of the day, what that process is, to be very candid,
Yeah.
what
So I
you
mean,
think.
if we're being candid, I think that it would be hard for GAU to argue that the last version of your proposal was actually closer to our last best final than the previous ones. I mean, you took the opportunity to remove language about provisions that were unrelated to minimums in the context of what's happened. And in some respects, my perception is that you intentionally made your version of Article 10 even less attractive than it was before, almost to make a point. And fine, that's okay. I mean, you're welcome to propose whatever you'd like. You know, and we will continue to listen to any proposals you have. But there was nothing, I mean, we found your last proposal even less compelling if that was possible. And I think there was some pretty strident language used when it was presented, and that's fine, and I understand it, but you know, just because we're making progress on these, and I appreciate that we're making progress on these other articles, it's not gonna be like we are waiting for progress on one of these other articles, and that all of a sudden is gonna be, oh, so now we're gonna give you a different version of Article 10. Like, I don't, if in some way, shape, or form, I telegraph that, let me remove that from, you know, the discussion, because that's not what that's not gonna happen.
No, and we're,
So, not to put words in your mouth, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing is that your route to TA Article 10 is for us to bring more and more proposals to you that are closer and closer to your last best final offer until it is your last best final offer, and that's how we TA, and you get to bring nothing else. On Article 10. Specifically. Is that what you're saying? Is that similar to what you're saying? Or you don't wanna engage with what I'm saying, my interpretation?
I'm happy to engage with what you're saying. I do not know how else to explain the definition of last, best, and final offer on a particular provision. I don't know how else to possibly explain it at this point.
Mhm.
Last, best, final, meaning that is the version of the proposal that is as close as possible to what we've heard from you.
Mhm.
That is what it means. And it is a terminology that's used in bargaining, and it's used very commonly in bargaining. And it is a clear signal for the other team that you're not prepared to go any farther. And I will acknowledge, as you pointed out before, that we did say that about a proposal, and then we did make a subsequent change. I acknowledge that, you brought it up, that is true. As bargaining continues, but I am telling you that I don't know how else to define the way that we have talked about and proposed Article 10. I don't know how else to explain it.
So it doesn't matter what we bring, nothing, you're unmovable on stipends.
Our last proposal was our last best final offer on Article 10. And I do not want it to be misconstrued that I am in any way, shape, or form telegraphing to you that by making movements on these other articles, that there's in some way, shape, or form a horse trade, that some sort of calculation that we have on our side of the table that's like, well, if they just do this, or they just do this, or they just do this. I want to be transparent about that. I'm not trying to compel you in a hard bargaining stature to say, well, if you would just agree on this and you would just agree on this, then you're going to get something else from us on Article 10. I don't want you to think that. I'm telling you explicitly, that's not likely. You know, don't misunderstand me.
Who wants to speak on article on stipends?
yeah, if you have just like 1 minute, not super
Yeah,
long
because
time.
we've got, I mean, you guys still have a proposal for us on Article.
It'll be a 5-minute proposal, so it's not too
Okay.
bad. So we got a little bit of time. But yeah, if you want to speak for just a minute, feel free.
Sorry, it's me again.
Sorry. I was just in the chat, so.
The bargaining exhibit. I'm mostly up to date on Article 10. I know that this is your last best final. I guess as a GA, last best final kind of doesn't matter if I can't live, like, I am dollars and cents away from not making rent, right? From getting evicted. Dog needed emergency surgery that nearly ruined me. I know that like as a bargaining team, your last best final, you can't move. My life expenses can't move. I can't get another job. I'm doing gig work. I'm applying for grants. In a sense, I don't know how to explain to you, like, it's not good enough. It just can't be, because you're asking, I don't even make minimum, you're asking most of your GAs to just start or to live on the street.
How do you not make minimum? You can't be paid under the minimum. by
Yeah,
contract.
No, we make more than that.
Oh,
I mean, how would you live on $21,000 in Gainesville?
We're just trying to rectify, how do we get to an end in Article 10? I mean, that's where we're at, and then we've given you offers and we've done that, and I mean, you can say our last one was, less, good looking or whatever. But, we do our best to, make those different processes, and we reiterated our last one, because at the end of the day, we're not gonna come in week after week and say we've made a little movement towards you, and
no, I
we
appreciate that.
don't get a proposal back, we get nothing,
I
right?
appreciate that.
And so, I mean, the question becomes, UF has been firm in their last best final since the end of September, I think it was. So it's been several months. And if UF is firmly in the belief that, that is your last best final, there is no movement. And Article 10, there is no connection with any other article. And, no matter what happens in any of these other articles, that's not going to affect your view on Article 10. Then why is the University of Florida not declared an impasse and not said we're done bargaining with this? Why are we continuing to have this conversation if it's only going to be one-sided on this?
Because I think we still believe that there's a lot of good work to do on the contract. I mean, we've demonstrated that. We brought 5 proposals today. We're still bargaining the contract.
Yeah, but impasse is by article. It's not for the entire thing. You continue
No,
bargaining.
I
by going
understand
through-
that.
Yeah, so like, if it's completely separate and you're done with Article 10, but
Right.
we haven't reached a TA,
Mhm.
what's the plan? Like, there is no plan there, except if we give in at the end of the day, right? If we concede entirely to what your last best final was. Right, that's the University of Florida's view, and that's how we view it. And maybe that's different than how you view it, but that's how we view it over here.
Well, I mean, I appreciate, look, I'm not gonna tell you how to, I'm not gonna tell you how to view it. I'm not gonna tell you how to, I'm not gonna tell you how to bargain either. I mean, you're welcome to bargain however you want. I mean, you're welcome to. We still want to engage in the process, and we think there's still a possibility for us to reach an agreement.
Okay, and every time we give a proposal to you, you understand that becomes less likely for us. We view
Okay,
no progress. There's no progress on those things, like,
okay.
Speaking of no progress, what's the Article 16?
I think it's
16
technically on our side of the
It's
table.
on our side?
I think technically, we haven't made any movement in a couple of
Okay.
counter proposals, on our side. I'm not sure. Maybe if you remember, it's on your side of the table, but I think it's on ours.
I think it's technically on your side of the table.
On
Yeah.
ours,
I think technically, yeah.
okay.
But I think we may have 3 rounds of kind of just re-proposing the same thing, or 2 or 3.
Yeah, because we've made a couple of
Yeah.
changes, but the University of Florida has not made those changes, so. I've sent you our proposal, Article 8,
Okay,
on there. I'm not gonna share it on screen really. I will share it on screen really quick. Yeah, there's no changes to what you gave us last time. We think that, we talked back with some GAs and we think that it is a fair counter. And it addresses a lot of the concerns that, GAs had as it regards to paid leave. Give me just a second on Zoom to open it up for you guys.
Sorry, it's in black and white. We didn't make any changes.
Yeah,
You-
it should,
so
Removed
this
them
is
every
this is the same one that you guys gave us the last time.
They-
it's the same one you gave us.
Oh, the same one. we
This is
gave
what you gave
Okay,
us last
gotcha.
time. Yeah, we believe that your changes, we appreciate the work you guys put into it, and we think it's fair. We do
Okay.
agree. So,
All right, so if that's the case, then Austin, do you want me to do 8 and 9 and 19 and 20 and send them to you in DocuSign?
yeah, I think
That's
that's fine.
good.
Yeah.
So
For
8, 9, 19.
Yep.
20.
everyone on Zoom, this is where we're at. We've removed the word sibling from the definition of immediate family up here, which would affect paid leave. But in addition to those kind of changes, we go from 8 weeks to 12 weeks of paid leave on a 12-month basis. And there's an extended definition of family specifically for bereavement. So then you can still use bereavement for this sort of extended definition for your family or for your employee, spouse, or partner. So we think this is a fair kind of trade-off for those sort of things as it relates. So it is, I think we've done good work on Article 8. It's the first one we opened. We've put a lot of back and forth into it.
Yeah.
And I think it benefits, everyone in these situations. So,
Let me check.
The only difference that we made is, we removed the memorandum of understanding from
Yeah,
the heading. Which should not be there.
It is.
no, there are those copies don't have, it. Yeah.
I printed these, realized it was there, deleted it, and then.
It's, I
printed
mean,
it.
it's, it really, I mean, it doesn't really matter one way or another. If you guys don't want to put it on there in the future, I'm not gonna lose any sleep over it. Sometimes people want to have it, sometimes people don't want to
I
have
mean,
it.
it's not a
Yeah.
it's not an
Right.
MOU, right? Cause it doesn't go into effect
So the-
once it's signed.
The different legal interpretations are in the time period between it's a TA. I mean, it really kind of comes down to sort of technical legalese. It's not, as long as we take it as an entire package for ratification, I don't care.
Mhm.
It's not gonna make me upset one way or another.
There,
If you'd prefer not to have it on there, we can remove it. I want to look at one thing real quick. I just want to bring up the scorecard to figure out which ones we still have sort of outstanding, because this is gonna be 8, 9, 19, and we're redoing 20. 20 already was TA, we're gonna re-TA 20, right?
yeah, because
Because
we removed that one
we moved
clause,
the one
yeah.
clause, okay. All right. So we will see you all on the 28th.
Yes.
Okay. All right, I will, before I leave, I'll make sure I get this over to you. Do you want it to, do you want both? How do you want me to set up the DocuSign? Who do you want to be the recipient?
It doesn't really matter. Do you want to sign it? or You want me
It
to?
doesn't really matter. Could we both sign them?
I can set it,
Yeah.
I can put a line for both of you. if you
Yeah, we can do
prefer.
that.
Okay,
Do
I'll
that.
do that. I do have to send it to your UFL address,
Mhm.
or it'll give me trouble. I can't do it to an external address, so is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. We will see you in
It's
3 weeks.
Yep.
Yep, all right.
Those of you on Zoom, just stick around for just a second. We'll have a quick debrief, but we'll try to get everyone out here by 4 regardless. And then
There's only 12 minutes, so.
Yeah.
Why don't you just go home?